I was not afraid of dying. I want you to understand that before anything else pours out of me, before the images come rushing back like floodwater through a cracked levee. I had lived 95 years on this wrinkled earth, and by the time my body surrendered on that Tuesday morning in late October, a kind of morning where the sky looks like it was painted with ash and old pewter, I had already made my peace with leaving. My name is Ezekiah Duverne, and I am telling you what no living mouth should be able to tell. My great-granddaughter Saoirse was holding my hand when it happened. She is 12 years old, gap-toothed, and smells like the shea butter her mother rubs into her braids every Sunday morning. She was reading to me from a book about an astronomer who mapped stars that had already gone cold by the time their light reached our eyes. I remember thinking that was the most beautiful kind of sadness, loving something that no longer exists in the form you love it. Then the pain in my chest, which had lived there like an unwelcome tenant for 3 months, suddenly stopped. Not a slow easing, a complete and total cessation, like someone had simply switched off a machine. And then I was gone. What I describe next will not fit neatly into any theology you have inherited. It will not resemble the white light tunnel that ministers summarize in 20-minute sermons, nor the cotton cloud paradise painted on the ceiling of churches where my grandmother used to fan herself with cardboard funeral home advertisements. What I entered was not peaceful at first. It was, more than anything, accurate, as if reality had finally corrected itself after 95 years of being slightly off-center. I found myself standing, and I say standing, though I had no body in any conventional sense, at the edge of something I can only call a threshold. It was a landscape, but not a landscape of geography. It was a landscape of meaning. Every direction held a different kind of knowing, and the air itself, if air is even the right word, pressed against me with the weight of accumulated time. I could feel centuries in it, millennia. I could feel the compressed suffering of people who had died in ways I will not name here, because even in that place, naming certain things carelessly felt like an insult to the weight they carried. I was not alone. There was a presence beside me that I understood immediately, though I had never experienced anything like it in my 95 years. Not a figure, not a face, a presence that felt the way the deepest resonating note of a church organ feels in your sternum, not heard so much as inhabited. I will call it what it told me to call it, which is nothing, because it offered no name. But I knew what it was the way you know your own mother's footstep on a staircase without turning around. It spoke first, or rather, meaning transferred from it to me in a way that bypassed language entirely and deposited itself directly into understanding. The closest translation I can offer is this: you have been brought here to see what most people are not brought here to see. This is not a gift. It is a commission. I did not feel honored. I felt the particular weight of a thing you did not ask for but cannot refuse. The presence showed me a map, not paper, not digital, a living cartography that breathed and shifted like the surface of deep water. It was a map of something I can only describe as spiritual inheritance, the invisible architecture that every human being is born into, the accumulated weight of blessings and curses that move through bloodlines the way certain diseases do, silently, generationally, without the knowledge of the people carrying them. Most of the map I cannot describe because the images have no equivalent in human vocabulary. And I promised myself before I sat down to write this that I would not reach for false analogies. I will only tell you what was shown to me directly, in the part of the map that pulled me close like a lodestone pulls iron filings. The presence fixed my attention on a particular thread running through the map. It was dark, not the darkness of evil. I need you to understand this distinction, because the darkness of evil and the darkness of suffering are not the same color, though many people who have never seen either up close mistake one for the other. This was the darkness of a wound that had been reopened too many times to fully close. A wound that had developed its own ecology, its own strange life inside the injury itself. The thread was the thread of a people, my people. And what the present showed me was not what they had done. It was what had been done to them, and more terrifyingly, what was still being done. Not by flesh, not by policy, though policy was a tool of it. Not by poverty, though poverty was a mechanism of it. What was still being done ran deeper than any of those things, deeper than history as we write it in books, deeper than sociology, deeper than psychology, deeper than the reach of any human institution. What I saw was a deliberate, organized, and ancient assault on the spiritual architecture of black people specifically. Not black people as a racial category in the American political sense. I want to be precise here. But black people as a particular lineage of human beings whose spiritual DNA, whose specific frequency of connection to the divine, had been identified long before any nation-state drew its borders, as something that needed to be severed. I watched it the way you watch time-lapse footage of weather systems forming, centuries compressed into moments of understanding. I watched how the assault worked not through dramatic, visible destruction, but through the patient, methodical targeting of specific things. The first thing I saw being targeted was memory. Not historical memory in the way activists speak of it, though that was part of it. I mean the deeper memory, the cellular, the spiritual, the kind of memory that knows which direction to face when you pray without being told. I watched how, across generations, that memory had been systematically interrupted, not just by the obvious violences, but by something more calculated. The replacement of internal knowing with external dependency. The rewiring of a people's relationship with their own perception of God, of reality, of themselves. It was sinister. That is the only word I have for it. Not evil in the cartoonish sense, sinister in the original sense. Something that operates from the shadowed side, something that uses indirection, that works through proxies, that leaves no fingerprints because its fingerprints are everywhere. I watched how it worked through the generations closest to me. I saw my grandmother Persia, who died when I was 11, and I saw the invisible weight she carried that no one in my family ever named, a bone-deep distrust of her own spiritual instincts that had been installed in her like a parasite during the years of her childhood in a Georgia that would rather see her broken than believing. I saw my father Casimiro, who preached every Sunday with a voice like a cedar splitting, and yet could not look in a mirror without finding an enemy there. I saw the invisible hand that had placed that enemy behind his eyes long before he was old enough to resist it. I am not saying these people were weak. I am saying they were fighting enemies that had made themselves invisible. And fighting invisible enemies exhausts you in ways that fighting visible ones never could. Because at least with visible enemies, you know you are in a war. The presence let me see the mechanism of it more closely. And this is the part that I have wrestled with most since I returned. Because it is the part that defies the categories I was raised with. There are forces, I will not dress them up or dress them down, that operate in the non-physical architecture of human existence the way viruses operate in the body. Looking for vulnerabilities, exploiting them, replicating damage. These forces are not new. They are not American. They are not even historical in the way we use that word. They are older than the nations that used them and older than the ideologies that channeled them, and they will outlast both. What I was shown is that these forces have a particular investment in a particular disruption. The severing of black people from a form of spiritual authority that they carry genetically, that is woven into the very structure of their being, and that, if it were ever fully activated and recognized, would constitute something that the presence communicated to me as a kind of recentering, a correction of something vast and structural that has been tilted for centuries. I do not have better language than that. Recentering, like a bone that was set wrong and needs to be rebroken to heal straight. The assault, therefore, is not incidental. It is not a byproduct of racism or colonialism, though it uses both as instruments. It is targeted, it is continuous, and its primary method, this is what made me weep in a place where I had no tears, is not hatred. Hatred would be too obvious. Its primary method is distraction, the distraction of making survival so consuming that there is no energy left for the deeper work. The distraction of substituting performance for encounter, church attendance for genuine contact with the divine, public theology for private transformation. The distraction of teaching a people to look for liberation in the same external institutions that were designed for their containment. The distraction of self-dissolution dressed as liberation, erasing the very particular, specific, irreplaceable identity of this lineage, and replacing it with a generic humanity that costs them nothing and transforms nothing. Sinister, patient, old. Then the presence showed me something else. And this is the part that I have turned over in my mind every day since I was returned to this body. Every morning when I open my eyes and feel the ache in my knees and the stiffness in my hands, and the low, persistent wonder that I am still here. It showed me resistance. Not resistance in the way we use that word in political discourse. Not marching, not organizing, though those things matter. Resistance in the spiritual sense. The places where the assault had not succeeded. The places where the thread had held. And those places were not where I expected them to be. They were not in the grand institutions. They were not in the large churches or the prominent families or the documented histories. They were in kitchens. They were in the specific way certain grandmothers held their grandchildren and told them things that didn't have names, but that lodged in the grandchildren's bones like deep splinters, working their way inward, toward the heart, year by year. They were in the music made by people who were trying to say something that language couldn't carry. They were in the particular stubbornness of certain men and women who refused to let the self-distrust take full root, who kept returning to some internal knowing, even when every external authority told them to distrust it. They were in the children who grew up in houses where someone, a grandmother, a grandfather, an aunt who never married, a deacon who came for Sunday dinners, someone carried the older knowledge, not always consciously, not always accurately, but carried it. I saw my own life in this. I saw what Persia had passed to me without knowing she was passing it. I saw what Casimiro had passed to me even through his fractures. I saw the chain of broken and imperfect carriers, and I saw that the breaking had never been total. That is what the forces doing the assaulting had never fully accounted for. That you can fracture a lineage without destroying it. That the most reduced and compressed seed still holds the full information of the tree it came from. The presence spoke again, or transferred meaning again, in that way that bypasses language. And this time what it gave me was not a vision, but something closer to an instruction. Tell them what they are carrying. Tell them the assault is real, but the defeat is not. Tell them the distraction is the weapon, not the poverty, not the violence, not the history. Those are downstream. The distraction is upstream. Find the upstream. And then it said something that I have sat with every morning since, something I am still not sure I fully understand, but that I feel the truth of like a hand pressed flat against my chest. The frequency they carry was not given to them by accident or by history. It was placed in them deliberately, before the nations were formed, for a time that is approaching. This is why it is being targeted. You do not target what is harmless. I wept then, and the weeping was not grief. It was something closer to recognition, the way you weep when you hear a piece of music that expresses something you have felt your whole life and never had words for. Recognition and relief, and a kind of solemn, humbling joy. I was returned to my body in the middle of a breath. Saoirse was screaming. Medical personnel were there. I don't know how long I had been gone. 7 minutes, they told me later, though 7 minutes does not describe what I experienced, any more than saying a book contains 200 pages describes what happens inside a reader. I am 95 years old, and I have been sent back with something I am not equipped to carry alone. I am a man who spent his working life repairing shoes in a small shop in a neighborhood that has since been gentrified into unrecognizability. I am not a theologian. I am not a prophet. I am not, and have never been, important in any way the world measures importance. But I saw what I saw, and I was told to tell it, and so I am telling it. If you are part of this lineage, and you will know whether you are not by your ethnicity, but by the resonance of what you are reading, then what I need you to hear is this. The exhaustion you feel is not weakness. The spiritual hunger that your institutions keep failing to satisfy is not ingratitude or godlessness. The sense you carry, often at the very bottom of yourself, that you are meant for something that keeps getting intercepted. That sense is accurate. It is not delusion. It is not ego. You are carrying something old and real and specific, something that has been targeted precisely because it is old and real and specific. And the targeting has been effective enough that most of you have lost the language to talk about it, which means most of you have lost the ability to protect it. The distraction is the weapon. Find the upstream. I am not telling you to distrust your history or your community or your faith traditions. I am telling you that all of those things can be used as instruments of the very assault they appear to be resisting if you are not paying attention to the deeper frequency underneath them. Community can become performance. Faith can become sedation. History can become a prison of grievance that consumes the energy needed for the forward work. Find the upstream. Find the thing that is being distracted from. Sit with it. Protect it. Pass it to your children the way those grandmothers passed it. Not always with words, not always with clarity, but with the full weight of your intention and your presence. I have been home from the hospital for 6 months now. My body is not what it was, even accounting for the fact that it was 95 years old before it stopped and restarted. I tire easily. My hands shake in the morning. Saoirse still comes on Saturdays and reads to me, though she has moved on from the astronomer book to something about deep-sea creatures that live in the complete absence of light and have developed their own illumination systems. I told her, last Saturday, what I have told you here. Not all of it. Some of it. The parts I thought she could hold. She sat very still while I talked, the way children sit still when they are genuinely thinking rather than performing attention. When I finished, she said, "So we have something in us that somebody doesn't want us to figure out?" I said yes. She said, "That's kind of like the anglerfish. It makes its own light because the ocean won't give it any." I have been thinking about that ever since. 12 years old, gap-toothed, smelling of shea butter. And she cracked it open with 8 words. That is the thing. That is exactly the thing. The light was never going to come from the ocean. The light was never going to come from outside. The assault works by convincing you that you are dependent on external sources for the illumination you were born already carrying. You are the anglerfish. You are already lit. You just have to stop waiting for the ocean to do it for you. I am 95 years old. I died and came back and was given a commission I did not ask for. I have done my part. The rest belongs to you. Find the upstream. Protect the frequency. Pass it forward intact. The defeat is not inevitable. Nothing about this is inevitable. But the window the present showed me is narrowing, the way all windows do, the way the last light narrows before it goes. And what happens on the other side of the narrowing depends entirely on what you do with what you now know. I have spoken. If this story moved something in you, like this video and subscribe. The truth needs to travel further than one pair of eyes.